Welcome to Qatsyr Harvest. This is episode 32 as we continue our investigation of everything that can be known about Shabuah. Shabuah is the promise of 7, and it is the ingathering which is next to be fulfilled. What we have done to try to understand Shabuah well, and this now is Wookie. He decides that he needs a little refreshment, so I think he's going to drink some of my iced tea. So excuse the interruption. We want to make sure Wookie's comfortable. What we have done to better understand everything that can be known about Shabuah is to look at the way Christianity has corrupted it, because their stain and rubbish that they have piled on this event, the fulfillment of Shabuah, which they claim was fulfilled almost 2,000 years ago in 33 CE, although they actually don't know the date, with the birth of their church, where the sign of it is that people babbled. They yapped in different languages. Of course, one of those languages was not Hebrew, the language that they would have spoken in Jerusalem, and one was not Greek, the language that this message was recorded in. But nevertheless, Peter and Luke in Acts 2 claim that Shabuah, which we know to be a harvest, is the 4th of 7 Moed Mikre. It is an ingathering of mature wheat. It is scheduled for 7 years prior to Yahweh's return with the actual Messiah Dode. That would be May 22nd in 2026, as the time of Jacob's or Israel's troubles begins. And while that is an accurate assessment of what Shabuah represents, the Christian New Testament is very good at ripping things off and stealing them. And so they completely passed over the first 3 Moed Mikre, Pesach, Matzah, and Bakorim, because they didn't fit their new religion, and decided they would pass over the last 3, which pertain to the return of Yahweh and the actual Messiah Dode in 33 CE, which is your 6,000 Yah, Teruah, Kippurim, and Sukkah. And they would claim just one for themselves, although they would give it a new name, and they would describe it in a manner that was completely inconsistent with Yahweh's testimony. So to pull off this shenanigan, what they had to do was to misappropriate passages from the Torah and prophets. And, well, Paul was pretty good at it. He kind of knew right where to look to find a word pattern that could be twisted to appear as if it was speaking to the same event or subject, and then twisting it so that it actually conveyed the opposite of what God intended. Luke and Peter were not nearly as crafty. And so thus far, they have picked 3 passages to corrupt, to justify Pentecost, and they have all been laughable. I mean, there is literally no correlation between what they claimed happened on Pesach and what was asserted in those passages. And the current one happens to be an errant citation from 2 Samuel 7. And because of that, we are reviewing what God actually said so that you would know it in context. In our last program, the 31st episode of Qatsyr Harvest, I read all the way through Samuel 7, or 2 Samuel 7 in its entirety. So we're just going to pick it up at the end so we can continue to ponder the implications of it, because it's actually quite profound. That the prophecy that Peter and Luke tried to rip off is actually one of my very favorites, if not my very favorite prophecy, because it's speaks of Yahweh's enduring commitment to David, to the actual Son of God, returning king, and to Yahweh's love for him as an exemplar of the covenant. And the last of that prophecy reads, "And so I will establish his reign over his kingdom." This would be Dod's reign over Dod's kingdom. And he himself will restore and rebuild the family home for my name. And I will prepare and establish the throne of his kingdom forevermore as a continual witness. Christians are of the belief that since that says he will build a family home, a Be'eth, for my name, that this speaks of Dod's son Solomon, who was the one in the first 7 years of his reign, used the materials that his father had collected, the plan that he and Yahweh had worked out, and the mount that Dod had acquired to build what they call the first temple. According to Yahweh, it's not a temple. It is a family home, a Be'eth, for his Shem, for his name. And so they're suggesting that this is Solomon, not recognizing that when this is talking about, I will establish his reign over his kingdom, that can't actually be talking about Solomon. And nor can this reference to building the family home and establishing a throne for his kingdom, it can't be talking about Dod's son Solomon either, because it says forevermore as a continuing witness. So can't be Solomon. And even if it were Solomon, Solomon is not Jesus, so it doesn't fit to Jesus, which is what Peter was trying to rip off to claim that there was this prophecy regarding Dod's heir becoming the Messiah. Of course, it doesn't even mention Messiah, which is another error in the Christian New Testament citation. The reign and kingdom is Dod's reign, and it is Dod's kingdom that Yahweh will establish. And the kingdom had already been established, so by Dod and Yahweh working together. So what he's talking about is, since this is something that God's going to do, is the eternal kingdom of Dod as he returns as the king of the world in year 6000 Yah on Yom Kippurim, October 2nd, 2033. And then at that time, he shall restore and build the family home for my name. And Bana can be build or it can be restore, and it is based on Ben, so it's actually the feminine of Ben, kind of funny in that regard. But it is, as a verb, though, it would be the ending wouldn't necessarily convey a feminine characteristic. But because it is a combination of building and with son, it is considered to be restoring or rebuilding a family home. And in this case, it is for Yahweh's name. Solomon very quickly lost sight of the fact that this was a home for Yahweh's name. And because his people became so recalcitrant and rebellious during Solomon's reign and never recovered from it, rather than it being a home for Yahweh's name, it has been a testament to the fact that God's people, Yehudim, have erased God's name, done exactly the opposite of this. So as we move forward in time, it is true that Dod, when he returns with Yahweh, will be establishing and restoring a family home for Yahweh's name forevermore. And so it fits in that context. And then it says, I was, I am, and I always will be for him as a father, and he was, is, and always will be for me as a son. And this is 2 Samuel 7:14 in part. To understand this, all you have to do is look at the other two places that Yahweh says specifically, I am his father, he is my son. One of those is in the second Mizmor, and the other is in the 89th. And in both cases, the son is clearly identified as the son is here, because this is Yahweh speaking to Dod, his son, via his associate and the prophet Nathan, who is giving Dod this message. So Yahweh is saying, I will always be for him as a father, and he was and will always be for me as a son. All you have to do is think it through and look at the other two places where at this time, even as these Mizmor were being revealed, literally within this same exact time frame, Yahweh explained who was his son, Dod. So when that which is associated with him is warped and perverted, twisted, such that it is contrary to what has been stated, the one person that has been, whose purpose, whose titles, whose achievements have been warped and perverted, twisted, so that it is now contrary to what was actually stated more than anyone in all of human history, is Dod David. Dod David is the Messiah. He is the Son of God. He is our Savior. He is the returning King. He is the Shepherd. And he is even Elyon in Yah's presence, which means he's akin to God. And all of that was given to the false Messiah and mythical misnomer, Jesus Christ, and also afforded in part to the other false Messiah, that of Rabbinic Judaism, Bar Kokhba. And this is our challenge, and it's why I take so much time trying to expose and condemn Christianity, so that you can see how clear it is that God is angry that the religion was created to counterfeit and twist, steal, rob. It's a matter of identity theft being perpetrated against his beloved son, Dod. And so God is saying here that I know that what has been written about him, and there are hundreds upon hundreds upon hundreds of prophecies about Dod returning to fulfill Pesach, Matzah, and Makodim, and for the collaboration that would lead to the enablement of the covenant. And they are pervasive. They're even written in first person in the 22nd and 88th Mizmor Psalms. And so for all of that, including here, this very statement, all of 2 Samuel 7 has been convoluted and twisted by Christianity, doing this very thing to rob Dod of what God said of him, to create this mythical misnomer, Jesus. So God's saying that when that occurs, I will resolve the dispute against him, and I'm going to vindicate him, that's Dod, deciding with him to expose and issue a condemnation against the staves that are wielded by the rulers of nations, of men, against this fungus and this plague that has fallen upon the descendants of Adam. Nothing more sickening to God than religion, and the most deadly of all religions from God's point of view are ones that misappropriate what has been achieved and what has been acclaimed of his beloved son, Dod David. Therefore, God is reinforcing my steadfast devotion, enduring love, commitment to the relationship, and unmitigated favor. This can only be speaking of Dod. It does not speak of anyone else, including Solomon, who went AWOL probably within a decade of the time that he assumed the throne, because he pandered to false gods. And there's nobody else that Yahweh is this loving of, this devoted of, throughout the entire 6,000 year history from the garden back to Eden. And there's only one person actually named beloved, Dod. And there's throughout, particularly the song to Dod, the 89th Mizmor, that Yahweh reemphasizes over and over again, as he does throughout the Psalms, that his love, his favoritism, his devotion, his commitment to the relationship is, extraordinarily steadfast, loyal, dependable as it relates to Dod, and never will be removed from him, disassociated or diminished regarding him, substituted for another. So none of this can be substituted and given to a misnomer, who, by the way, is not mentioned anywhere. There is no mention of a Bar Kokhba. There is no mention of a Jesus Christ anywhere in the Torah and prophets. And without that, there is no justification for any of the claims made about either of them. He says, as was the case when I turned away from and completely rejected associating with Shaul, whom to show the proper way I removed from your presence. It's interesting that Yahweh actually didn't remove Shaul, the people's choice of kings, the more popular individual, from Israel's presence. He went off on his own, became full of himself, thought that the world revolved around him, thought he could augment the Torah, and that he was responsible for defeating foes. And he lost a horrible battle. Samuel made it very clear that Yahweh was no longer with you. It became obvious that he became demon-possessed, and he turned against David, and he went into a battle, and he lost his head, literally. And so it's not that God removed him from your presence. He removed himself. The Shaul, however, that also tried to kill Dod, literally, who was demon-possessed, who was improper in his ways, who was also named Shaul, that Yahweh will remove from human presence by way of completely expunging all traces of his religion, Christianity, is the Shaul who became known as Paul, whom Yahweh says he is the plague of death. And in this particular case, it is the effect of Christianity that is going to be removed. And even more importantly, it is Christianity that was the most aggressive at misrepresenting what Dod represents, and therefore doing the very thing that God says, I will not ever forgive anyone or ignore a perversion of his reputation or accomplishments, which is the essence of Christianity. Without robbing Dod to create the myth of Jesus, there is no Christianity. And so Yahweh is very clear here that he's going to remove all traces of this corruption. And it is essential. It's what I'm trying to do so that I can get Israel's attention until such time as Israel comes to recognize that this corruption that has harassed them so over the centuries, associated with this mythical Messiah that they allegedly killed, that has subjugated them in so many ways, all of this has to be resolved. It has to be cleansed. It has to be purged. Otherwise, the truth which lies beneath it is far too difficult for God's people to perceive. This continues. And so, your family and your position of authority, your kingdom and reign are assured, as it is trustworthy and dependable, firmly established and credible, enduring forever as an eternal witness. In my presence, your throne and seat of honor will be established and sustained forevermore as a restoring testimony. Okay, well, I know you. That's very exciting. Yeah, I can't wait to see Dode. Uh, what we have here is your family. That would be Dode's family is Yehudim, Yisraelites in a broader sense, and they are going to return to prominence when Dode returns on Yom Kippurim, the Day of Reconciliations. Dode's position of authority and kingdom, his reign, supersede all others. He is Yahweh's choice of king, and Yahweh is very clear, particularly in the 89th Mizmor, and here that it is Dode who is returning to be king of everything. And you can be assured that's going to happen. You have God's word on it, and he is trustworthy and dependable. And Dode will continue to be the eternal witness. And then making it certain that it is Dode and no one else, and a future event, not something that had previously happened. God says, my presence will be, that all this will occur in my presence. Of course, Yahweh's presence was not seen around Solomon, and Yahweh's presence was not seen or experienced or noted at any time around the mythical misnomer, Jesus. It will, however, be inseparable from the appearance of Dode, because Yahweh twice, one in the 12th chapter of Zechariah, and the other is in the latter part of the 89th Psalm, says specifically that when he returns, though David will be as brilliant as the sun in his presence, as Elion, as God. So they will be together. And then your throne and your seat of honor will be established and sustained forevermore. Solomon's throne, which he inherited from his father, but his throne didn't last very long. And he ended his life in despair, and likely very estranged from Yahweh, because he brought so much religion into Israel, and it led to the destruction of Israel as a united kingdom. So the one throne that Yahweh consistently says is established forever is that of Dode. Then this ends consistent with all of these words and in accordance with the entire revelation, and in this manner, Nathan, which means to give, conveyed all of this to the man to whom it all pertains, Dode. He didn't give it to Solomon. He didn't give it to Jesus. He didn't give it to the Lord. He didn't give it to Peter or Paul or Luke. No, he gave it to Dode, which means Dode is the one who's got an eternal throne. It means that Dode is the king of the eternal kingdom. It means that Dode is the son and Yahweh is Dode's father. It means that Dode is our savior. It means that it all pertains to Dode, and any time that is twisted or removed from Dode to give to another, as is in the case of the mythical misnomer Jesus Christ or Bar Kokhba, Yahweh will assure you that those people will be expunged from the earth. And the best they can hope for is the cessation of their soul, the dissipation of their soul to nothingness. And in many cases, particularly in the case of Peter, Paul, and Luke, they'll spend eternity in hell. So this prophecy, we go all the way back to the beginning of it, has been about houses and who builds them, and as well as who lives in them. It has been about Dode since the beginning, who had a home. Not Jesus, who was homeless throughout the myths conceived about him. Its focus has been on what God is going to do with and through his beloved son. It's also about seeds and thrones, who sows them and who sits on them. As such, the three so-called Abrahamic religions predicated on false messiahs: Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. And they should be vociferously renounced if they had happened in their infancy, they wouldn't exist to corrupt the world to this day. They would not have grown. Those who are adept at changing names, who actually made a religion out of doing so, Peter, Paul, and pals, replaced Dode's name with Iosu Jesus in a desperate attempt to make their counterfeit appear divine. Foolology became part and parcel of Christianity. It was the first phase of replacements, since the revisionists would go on to replace Jews with Christians and Israel with their church, the Torah with their New Testament. It's everything in Christianity is about replacement, foolology. David, the individual being addressed, was robbed by these early Christians to create the illusion that their Jesus was the Messiah. That is why we find Yahweh coming to the defense of his being son, his Hamayach, Messiah, Aryasha, Savior, and returning Melech King. God chose a shepherd boy, a child chasing after sheep, he calls them lammies, to lead his people and enlighten the world. He did not choose a scholar. He did not choose a rabbi. He didn't choose a theologian, an expert in linguistics, a star athlete, a social media celebrity, or a man with a proven record in politics or the military. It was brilliant, and it was thoughtful, articulate, and courageous. Attributes Yahweh would cultivate over time. The result is the Mizmor and the Mashal, Proverbs and Psalms, even the fulfillment of the Moedim, the restoring witnesses to the eternal testimony. God's plan is marvelous in all of its implications. Yahweh is constantly reminding us that he is focused on Yisrael. The descendants of Jacob are his people. That has not, nor will it ever change. There is no room for a Gentile church. Dode established a united Yisrael in the Promised Land, incorporating Jerusalem as his home. So when Yahweh promised to appoint a place for my people, Yisrael, planting them such that they will never have to move again, he's addressing a time nearly 3,000 years removed from this discussion, when he will return with Dode and establish the forever kingdom. After having fulfilled Pesach and Matzah leading to Bikurim, Dode's going to return 2,000 years later on Kippurim, and he will serve as the King of Kings. All the psalmist has shown will come to fruition. His will be the place of honor, as it is his witness that makes him the most deserving candidate, both based upon his prophecy and his execution of it. As the ultimate proud father, Yahweh will hold those who have robbed his beloved son, his firstborn, of this dignity. And he's going to hold them accountable. And there's going to be ramifications, and they will not be pleasant. He will chastise those who have perverted and twisted the promises he has made to his beloved son by perverting this prophecy. If you're a Christian, you're in deep trouble. The entire religion is founded on perverting and twisting the promises that God made to Dode. Since there is no prophecy or promises made to a Jesus, 100% of the prophecies that are robbed by Christians to create this myth that there was a Jesus Christ are stolen from Dode. All of them. And oh, does it anger God? And you say, how can that be if it's the most popular religion in the world? Truth has never been popular. Lies throughout history are far more, they're more appealing to the masses. Boy, if you don't think that's true, spend a little time around in the ex-Goldfish Bowl. and see what you have to deal with. Now, once again, Yahweh revealed something that is exceedingly important, and the religious have sought to convolute it to serve really twisted and perverted interests. That which Peter, Paul, and Luke took from Dode to make their Iusun appear worthy became part and parcel of Christianity. There's no separating their act of identity theft from the very essence of Jesus Christ. Therefore, since this ongoing diatribe robbing Dode and his people has been appalling to the Almighty, I wanted to present the next line in context, so as a reminder as to where we have been. The preposterous Peter propositioned. Israelite men, listen to these words. Iusu, the Nazarene, is a man who publicly demonstrated to you that he is from Theos, using supernatural powers and abilities to perform extraordinary miracles and prophetic significance. These are signs which the Theos God performed through him in your midst. Acts 2:22. He was appointed to the prearranged and prophetic plan and purpose of Theos. He was betrayed and given over to the hand of the Torahless, who chose to take control and lift him up, affixing him. Theos restored him to life and raised him, releasing and dismissing him from the suffering and pain of death, because it was not possible for him to exist held and influenced by these things. For DD, we'll call him David, said of him, I foresee the Kyrios Lord in front of me, always on my behalf, because from me, his right hand, I will not be shaken or swayed. Therefore, my heart rejoices and my tongue delights that also my flesh will abide and endure, as a result, a confident and trusting expectation. Because my soul will not be utterly forsaken and totally abandoned in Hades, neither will your Holy One be allowed to see decay and decomposition. Reveal and make known to me the way to a complete life of joy and gladness in proximity to your presence. Gentlemen, brothers, it is possible, after all, to say to you in open public discourse, enjoying freedom of speech with regard to and concerning the patriarch David, that he both died and was buried, and his tomb exists among us even to this day. Being therefore a prophet, and knowing that Theos swore an oath that out of the fruit of his loins would sit upon his throne, he foresaw and spoke about the rising up and standing upright of the Christone, because namely, he was not left behind and abandoned so as to remain at Hades, nor did his flesh see decomposition. Acts 2:30 and 31, all the way through, even beginning before that. I'm going to just highlight some of these, the dingers of stupidity in this statement that begins with, looks like the 22nd verse of Acts 2. They were not Israelite men. The Israelites had been hauled off into slavery and became lost 700 years prior to this time. They were Yehudim, Jews. They would not be listening to someone who was as stupid as this man, who misquoted their prophecy as badly as he had, and who called Shabuah Pentecoste, and was announcing that it was the birth of their church, and that the cause of it was the people were babbling. And then he cited Yoel which is a prophecy for the last days. So 2,000 years wrong. There was no Ayusu that lived in this time. There was no Jew named Ayusu. There was no prophecy of an Ayusu. There's no record of an Ayusu. Ayusu is a complete bogus moniker. And so they would not have known anything about an Ayusu, nor would anybody at that time. Nazareth did not exist at this time. Nazareth would not exist until the beginning of the 3rd century CE, 200 years later. And at this time, no one lived there. Prior to this, there was a very small, insignificant town by a different name, but that was 200 years earlier. The whole myth of a Nazarene was established based upon Constantine's mommy and Eusebius, who was the propagandist to Constantine and wrote it into the text. So you're wrong on Israelites, you're wrong on Ayusu, and you're wrong on Nazarene. And those are the first 3 names. Now, the next is a man. No, Ayusus never existed. He's a myth. Who publicly demonstrated to you. If he publicly demonstrated anything to them, then he wouldn't have, this whole argument wouldn't be taking place now, would it? That he is from Theos. No. First of all, your own text says that he is from Joseph and Mary. There was no Joseph, there's no Mary, and Mary means contentious and rebellious. So I can guarantee you that if somebody's going to be going to perform a role of this magnitude, their mommy is not going to be named Mary. So he is from Theos. Well, how would they? Theos. Theos is a Greek word. El and Elohim are the Hebrew words for God, and God has a name. It's Yahowah. If he's not from Yahowah, then he's not from God. One of the tests in Debarim, where Yahowah tells us how we can tell if something is from him or not, whether a message is divine or deadly, is the use of his name. When his name does not appear, as this is the case in Theos, you know that the text is not from God. This Ayusu, who is a myth, could not be from God, because if he were from God, it would say the same thing as the text we have just read in 2 Samuel, where Yahweh's name is prolific. Using supernatural powers and abilities, Yahowah essentially never uses supernatural powers and abilities to prove the divine inspiration or calling of an individual. Yahowah can, on occasion, and does use miraculous powers, well, to create the universe, for example, to conceive life as another example. And when he took Abraham to see the entirety of the universe so that he would understand in the 7th dimension what God was offering him by way of an inheritance, when he performed the signs that caused Mitzrayim to release his children. But you'll notice that God tries very hard not to be ostentatious. God wants thinking people to come to him based upon the credibility of his words. And so if you're looking for evidence that someone is speaking for God, or that God is speaking through them, the evidence will come through the credibility, the consistency, the accuracy of the words they convey. And that has been true from the beginning. Every word of this is a lie, and since it's a lie, liars don't represent Yahowah. To perform extraordinary miracles and prophetic significance. There isn't a single prophecy that the Ayusu Christu fulfilled. Not one. There's not a single reference to him, not a single act, and that trumped up life that was prophetic. All of the prophecies regarding what happened in 33 CE and what will happen in 2033 CE pertain to Dowd. Now, there are other individuals, such as myself, as the Adama Parah, the man from Edom, the final Zeroah, and the Bashar herald of Dowd, and the Kol voice of Yahowah, the Choder, that God speaks of with prophetic significance, but you'll find them, written so that there is actually a prophetic significance. And the reason that Peter, Paul, and Luke never cited a valid prophecy ever in the entirety of the Christian New Testament to validate their claims is because they couldn't find one. And all they could do was misappropriate, misquote, and twist things that God had said about another. And then these are the signs. That is the same lie that Allah promotes throughout the Quran. They denied my signs, except he didn't have any signs. Same thing is true here. There were no signs. If somebody is speaking for God, there is an almost 100% correlation with something that these Twistians have missed. Peter, Luke, and Paul wouldn't have to be claiming that you should listen to the words of Ayusu if Ayusu actually existed and wrote words. They could read them. All of Yahweh's prophets wrote down what they said and what God conveyed through them. And we have books named after them for that reason. And so the very fact that nothing was written by the mythical Ayusu proves that Ayusu didn't represent Yahowah. Had he done so, he would have written in Hebrew, and his message would have been conveyed in his own hand. But it wasn't. However, if you look at the real Messiah and Son of God, our Savior, Dowd, we have more written in his hand that has been preserved through the Dead Sea Scrolls than even what we have from the great prophet Isaiah, or even more than we have from the entire Torah. Now, that's something to think about, isn't it? And then this ends with, as you know. When somebody says, as you know, then they don't know. It really is as simple as that. Because if they did know, there would be no reason to say, as you know. He was appointed to and prearranged and prophetic. Again, prearranged and predestination are inconsistent with Yahowah. Yahowah is about free will. So there is nothing prearranged. There are things that Yahowah has told us he is going to do, but they're not predestined. And if there is a prophecy, Yahowah will speak of it, and he will name the individuals that the prophecy pertains to. There are many hundreds of prophetic promises from Yahowah regarding what he is trying to achieve through me, as his Basar, as his Kol, as his Adama Parah, as his Zeroah, as his Bashar, as his Choder, as his Nakar, as his Malak. It just goes on and on, as the man from Edom, who will save many, as Yada. There's not one about this misnomer. And as many as there are regarding me, probably second most in all of the prophetic text, there is one person who is mentioned more often, and deservedly so, the actual Messiah and Son of God, Dowd David. But the sum total of prophecies pertaining to Ayusu, goose egg. There is no chance whatsoever that Christianity is true. In fact, everything that has been said in Acts 2:22 is wrong. And the same thing is true in Acts 2:23. And then to say that, and then a prearranged plan of Theos that he was betrayed. No. No. The purpose of Dowd, the Messiah and King, the Son of God, arriving in 33 CE was for him to fulfill Pesach Matzah as the Son of God. He wasn't betrayed to perform it. He wasn't given over to perform it. He wasn't handed to the Torahless to perform it. He volunteered to perform it. It would have been a betrayal if he hadn't performed it. So this notion that Christians have had that Jews killed Jesus and that they betrayed him is just a bunch of shit. I'm sorry, but that's the term. It's shit. Jews actually betrayed David because they failed to acknowledge that he was here and did these things. You can't betray a myth. And Dowd could not have been betrayed if Jews had sought the death of his body. If Jews had recognized him and sought to the death of his body by way of fulfilling Passover, it would have been a celebration of the purpose. So his dying is the purpose, not a betrayal. And if Jews had participated in the sacrifice of the Passover lamb, they would be upholding the purpose of God, not abandoning it. Again, profoundly wrong. Literally the inversion of what's true. Anomos is used to negate nomos. In Greek means to negate what follows, and nomos is the word used throughout the Christian New Testament to replace Torah. So this would be those without Torah. But the implication here is, of course, that it was the dastardly Jews that killed the Christian God. Oh my goodness. That's why God turned on them and gave all of his promises that he had offered to the Jews, to the Gentiles, because, well, those dastardly Jews, they betrayed the Son of God. Bull crap. I mean, just absolute bull. Yeah. The Torah, being anomos, is the essence of the Christian New Testament. So it would be to say, if he was handed over to the hands of those who were against the Torah, it would be to the jerks known as Peter, Paul, Luke, Mark, Matthew, et al. They were the ones who were anomos. Paul's letters exist to annul and replace the Torah. There is nobody in all of human history that has been more anomos than the author of the Christian New Testament. But Christians are so perverted. They think that rather than this acknowledging that they're the perpetrators, they're the ones betraying God, that it's instead the Jews. To take control of them and lift them up. Good God, they're just moronically stupid. Every word of this is wrong. And that's why, how can there be a religion of Christianity when everything they say is stupid? Just utterly ignorant. I mean, how stupid do you have to be to not know that the Jews in Judea in the first century did not crucify, and that it was the Romans who started about 150 years earlier that invented that grotesque form of torture, because the Romans were grotesque. They were savages. Crucifixion is a Roman form of embarrassment, of humiliation, of punishment. not the Jews in Judea. And plus, the Jews in Judea had no authority. The Romans were subjugating them. They were oppressing them. Judea was colonized by Rome. The government was Roman. The courts were Roman. He wasn't taken control of and lifted up by the Torahless and betrayed, as these disgusting anti-Semites are portraying. First of all, Yahuwah is a complete farce. He's a myth. But in the case of Dode, yes, Dode predicted 1,000 years before he had endured it, because he was a prophet, exactly how he would be sacrificed as the Passover lamb, describing Roman crucifixion some 700 years before Rome existed and 800 years before Roman-style crucifixion was invented. There's a prophecy here that is powerful, and of course they missed it. This is just absolute and total verbal diarrhea. Theos restored him to life and raised him. No, if you're the Passover lamb, your body is one and done. And the body of the Passover lamb is incinerated that night. So if you are actually fulfilling a prophecy and you are there to do what Dode did, is to fulfill the prophecy of the Passover lamb, your Bashar body serves that purpose. And after it has served that purpose, it is incinerated, never to be seen again. It cannot be restored to life. It's, first of all, it's hideous. It's grotesque. It's been brutalized. But second of all, you're going in the wrong direction. And third of all, life is not the body. This thing is all focused on, suffering and pain and corruption of the body. The body is absolutely meaningless other than as a symbol of the Lamb. Other than that, it is worthless. It's trash. Have any clue what God is offering through his covenant? It's a transformation from these bodies to being light energy, to being immortal, to being perfected, to being enriched, to being empowered. The body is disposable so that we can achieve those things. Dode wasn't restored to life. His soul was never extinguished. It was his soul that did the ultimate miracle, that carried our guilt to deposit it in Sheol, never to be seen again. And that is Dode's soul, the essence of his life, that returned to Yahweh. There was no resurrection of a physical body. Restored him, releasing him from the suffering and pain. No, again, absolutely not. God, you'd think that if you're pretending to speak for God, that you would get like 1 word in 10 right, wouldn't you? I mean, if you're going to speak for God, the standard ought to be 10 of 10 right. And so far, there's been, 100 words, and they've got 100 of them wrong. No, Yahweh did not release him from the pain. First of all, Yahweh's name isn't mentioned. That means they're not speaking for him. And he wasn't released from the pain. The pain that Rome inflicted was suffered by the Passover lamb. He wrote all about it in the 22nd Psalm. It was horrific. And the agony of separation with his soul was also endured, and Yahweh didn't shortchange that either. And there was no death. The body discarded. The soul continued. So God couldn't release him from death because he didn't die. Oh, by the way, if you want to pretend that your boy is a god, how in the hell does God die? And if you want to pretend that your myth is a god, then you ought to be worshiping the damn Jews if you claim they killed your God. Because they're evidently a whole lot more powerful than your God. And if that's supposed to be your God, then who was the God that was releasing him from death? I mean, come on, folks. Think some of this through. No, Dod's soul continued to live on, which is what he says. He says it over and over and over again so that we would understand it. His soul continued to exist because it says it was not possible for him to be held and influenced by these things. Actually, it was possible. That's what Yahweh did. He made it possible for Dod to suffer, his body to suffer as the Passover lamb, for his soul to be held in Sheol so that he could deposit our guilt there. All of these things were made possible so that Dod could be influenced by all of them because he volunteered to do so and because the results was so spectacularly beneficial to those of us who understand it and accept it. I mean, do you think for a moment that God is so sadistic that he's going to say, okay, beat the living crap out of him. There's no real purpose. Once you've finished beating the crap out of him, then we'll pretend like he comes back to life. What's the purpose? And they didn't even bother to say, what was he doing when he was affixed? What day was it? If you don't know what he was doing when he was affixed, it's just a ghoulish spectacle. It has no merit whatsoever. If you don't know what he came back from, what's the purpose of matzah? Why speak of Pentecost, but you can't even address in your narrative Passover, unyeasted bread, and firstborn children? Are you that stupid? I mean, really, it's just stupid. Christianity is based on stupid. Uh-oh, Grok won't get mad at me now. That's the AI. AI at X. Actually, your rules say that I can't call out someone and attack an individual based upon their race or their religion, because I am attacking a myth and criticizing people that, died 2,000 years ago. I'm actually not violating your rules, Rock, or anybody else's. And what I'm doing is incredibly compassionate. It's the single most compassionate thing a Christian has ever witnessed. When somebody has the compassion and the courage to tell you that your religion is based upon a pile of lies and that you're wasting your soul, they're doing you a tremendous favor. For DD, it's a placeholder. Let's assume they meant Dod. Said of him. Said of whom him? Dod never spoke of an Ayusu. Dod never once spoke of a Christ. Ever once, never. So that is a bold lie, and they know it's a bold lie. You can't find, I will give you all eternity to search the Mizmor, Psalms, and Mashal Proverbs of Dod. And I will give you $1 billion if you can find a Mizmor or a Mashal where Dod spoke of an Ayusu Christu. Dod said of him, I foresee the Kyrios lowered in front of me always on my behalf, because from his right hand I will not be shaken or swayed. They're quoting here the 16th, quoting is a really bogus term. They are misquoting the 16th Mizmor, and this now has, I see the Kyrios load in front of me. You know how many times Kyrios is, well, it's Greek, but how many times Lord is mentioned in that statement? 0. And you know who is mentioned in the statement? Yahweh. And so Dod is affirming that he and Yahweh are hand in hand, that Dod is Yahweh's right hand, and that he will always be steadfast as Yahweh's right hand. And so Dod is saying, I will never be shaken or swayed, ever. And that is why Dod's heart rejoices. That's why Dod's tongue delights. But in this case, it's not Sarkos flesh that is being mentioned, but Dod's Bashar, herald, that is here to speak of what Father and Son promised and then achieved. That also my flesh will abide and endure. No, good God. They're even quoting, well, pretending to quote, misquoting a Mizmor, which is inspired word of God. And they're saying that my flesh will abide and endure. No, it doesn't. The Bashar expressions about Dod, his witness, will abide and endure. But Dod's flesh, hell no. At the end of his first life, gonzo. End of his second life, beaten to a pulp and then incinerated. No. It's Dod's soul, not his flesh, his nephesh, not his Bashar, certainly not his Sarkos, that will abide and endure. And it's his, not Iousu Christus. As a result of a confident and trusting expectation. Because now we've got it right, soul, psyche, will not be utterly forsaken and totally abandoned. Yes, Dod knows, and he's speaking in first person about himself, my soul. It's Dod writing this. It's introduced as a song, lyrics written by Dod, speaking of my soul, not Iousu Christu. My soul will not be forsaken and abandoned. And it doesn't say Hades, it says Sheol, which is the name of the place. And it actually doesn't infer that his soul will not be abandoned there, because for a while it was abandoned there. It was taking the place of separation for the entirety of Chag Matzah to fulfill the Moed Mikre. But it actually says that Yahweh is not going to allow Shaul, which is written the same way as Sheol, to have his way and pervert the testimony and achievements of Dod. And that is the role of the Bashar herald, is to preclude that from happening. Neither will your Holy One, it's Kodesh in Hebrew, be allowed to see decay and decomposition. No, there is nothing akin to that in the Mizmor. And it wouldn't be true if there were, because Dod's first body did decay and his second body was incinerated. And the bodies were meaningless. Absolutely, utterly, and completely meaningless. If you're fixated on your body, and if you think, like Muslims do, that they use their bodies to go off and kill non-Muslims, and they use them to rape and do all that sort of thing, that their Lord, their rabbi, is going to reward them with a physical body with a perpetual cock and endless virgins to satiate his carnal desires for having been a really good mass murderer, then you are as stupid as the people who believe the Christian New Testament. You can't see heaven, right? You know why? I'm looking out the window there. I can't see heaven. You know why you can't see it? Because it's 4 dimensions beyond where we are. And guess what? You can't even maximize the experience in the 4th dimension, much less the 5th, 6th, and 7th, with a physical body. A physical body precludes you from leaving the 3rd dimension. So that body has to go bye-bye. The whole concept, by the way, of fire, when Yahweh uses fire as a metaphor, is trying to explain this to you. Fire consumes dead and decaying physical matter, and it transforms it into light and radiant energy. That's the whole concept. Your soul becomes an energy-based being, like light. And therefore, your physical body is utterly and completely meaningless, and you don't take it with you. You can be given one. Actually, you don't even have to be given one. You can transform some of your light energy into matter at a time of your choosing, based upon reversing E = mc². But It's by choice, and it doesn't decompose. Reveal and make known to me the way to complete life of joy and gladness and proximity to your presence. Why even cite it? If you're going to misrepresent it and it doesn't speak of an Iesu Christou. And by the way, Dode did not need to ask God, nor have I ever asked God to reveal and make known to me the way to a complete life of joy and gladness in proximity to your presence. You know why Dode never asked Yahweh for that? That's the same reason I've never asked him for it. Why would you ask God to give you what he has already given you? What do you think the Torah and prophets are filled with? An explanation from God to live a complete and joyous life in proximity to him. It's the entire purpose of the revelation. To ask God to give you what he has already given you is rude. That says that you don't really give a crap what he's provided. Doesn't mean anything to you. That you think that rather than taking advantage of what he's already given, you should ignore that and tell him that he needs to give you a special dispensation, your own special input. So when all these people write me and say, well, could you please explain this in something I might have written 100 times in these books? And can you please give me an answer to what this is? No. God, read the books. It's not my job. If I've already given it to you, and now you want to ask me to give it to you because you wouldn't take the time to read it? And if I'm irritated by it, can you imagine God? Gentlemen, brothers, is it possible, after all, to say to you an open public discourse? Well, it couldn't be open public discourse because there was no recording of this for at least 4 decades after this event. At the very earliest, well, this would have taken place in 33 CE, if it actually took place, and it didn't. And the first written account of it would have taken place in around 73, 4 centuries or 4 decades later, which is the equivalent really of 2 generations at that time. And we don't even have a text that dates to a manuscript that dates to the 3rd century of this. So obviously it's not to you an open public discourse. And no one enjoyed freedom of speech in a Roman province, ever. The Romans were oppressors. With regard to and concerning the patriarch DD, Dode wasn't a patriarch. Abraham, Yishak, and Jacob are the patriarchs. If I know that, how come he didn't know that? That he both died and was buried. Yes, Dode died at the end of his first life, except it was his body that was buried, and his nephesh soul lived on. And if you were to just think for a moment, if the one that Yahowah speaks of more vociferously than any other, I mean, there's 1,100 references to Dode in the prophets and Psalms. 0, of course, to Iesu Christou, about 700-800 to Moshe. And under that circumstance, and he's the man that's named beloved, the one that Yahowah says, he is my son, I am his father. If Yahowah didn't save Dode, if Dode isn't still alive, his soul flourishing with Yahowah, you know how much hope there would be for the rest of us? 0. So what are they talking about here? They want Dode dead and buried, but they want the entirety of Dode dead and buried. His soul, his body, all of it. Because otherwise, their act of identity theft doesn't work. And that's the whole basis of Christianity. He's a crude counterfeit. And so they believe Peter, Luke, and Paul were so conniving and so dismissive of their audience. They believed that by saying that Dode was DD, was dead and buried, that they could steal his identity, take all of his accolades, all of his accomplishments, everything God said about him that at least fit in the religion. We'll have to ignore the rest of it. And they could create a crude counterfeit and a mythical misnomer based upon robbing him so long as he was dead. So I guess that would mean it would be moral if I find a accident in the street and there's a couple of dead bodies and I dig into their pockets and I find a purse and a wallet and I steal their identity and I pretend to be those individuals and I rob them of everything that they have because they're dead, it's okay. That's the point here, isn't it? And by the way, nobody knows where Dode's first body is, and no one cares. No one. No one knows. No one cares. Second body was incinerated. Being therefore a prophet and knowing that Theos, God, swore an oath that out of his fruit of his loins, we've read this passage. Yahweh said that he would take a minute portion of Dode's nature. The way it's described, it's pretty obvious. He's speaking of DNA. And he will use it to reconstruct a body. Dode will need another body to fulfill Pesach. And so Yahweh said that he would do that for him. And when Dode returns, we know he's going to be as brilliant as the sun, so he's not going to have a normal body. But normal bodies can't handle that sort of thing. But in this particular situation, that's what he was talking about. For Dode to fulfill what was what he had volunteered to achieve, he would have to have another body. And it speaks nothing of fruit. It's actually zera, which means seed in the sense of sowing seeds that take root and grow. That would be his words. And it doesn't say loins. And it doesn't say that somebody would sit on his throne, and this they have capitalized, so that's God's throne, because it is Dode's throne. And by the way, the mythical misnomer Jesus never had a throne. And he didn't sit on a throne. And so it can't apply to him. And of course, it's the wrong throne. It's Dode's throne that Yahweh has built for him. He forever, this throne, he foresaw and spoke about the rising up and standing up of the Christone, a pathetic and disgusting lie. If your scriptures are based on pathetic and disgusting lies, then your God's a phony. Your religion is worthless. Now, that's a gift to you. Don't get mad at me. I don't care if you get mad at me, but it is a gift to you. That he spoke about the rising up and standing up of the Christone. No. Never once, ever, does anybody who was inspired by Yahweh, and that would include Dode, ever speak of a Christone. They don't even speak of a rising up of a Messiah. The Messiah title that Yahweh gave to Dode, and actually says Dode is his Messiah, and anointed him 3 times, and then an additional times with Yahweh's own special anointing oil. Yahweh does not ever speak of the Messiah returning. At one point, the Messiah, as Gabriel, God's most courageous and compassionate man, tells Daniel that he will return as the Messiah to fulfill Pesach, Matzah, and Bekurim. But that's Dode telling us what he is going to do, and he doesn't even present Messiah as a title. And that's the only mention of it. And there is no other place where there is a returning Messiah. Just doesn't speak of him returning Messiah. Dode's going to return. King is going to return. The Son of God's going to return. But Dode has a lot of titles. Messiah is not among the most important of them. I use it a lot because the Jews are anticipating their Messiah and because Christians have stolen that title from him. But it is not among his most important titles. And never once does Dode speak of a returning Messiah. And by the way, he is the Messiah. So no. I mean, not only no, hell no. Because namely, no, not namely. That's just, he was not left behind to so as to abandon and remain in Hades. No, the place is Sheol, and it was Dode who was not left behind. He was taken there, but not left behind. And he is not to say that this is addressing, and that Dode was addressing a Christone who, namely, he didn't name, is just pure insanity. This isn't even a good job of pulling off a fraud. Nor did his flesh see decomposition. Unless the flesh goes bye-bye, then he's not the Passover lamb. And the decomposing flesh is meaningless. Ever meaningless. And I don't think you could have a more decomposition in terms of utter ruin of one's flesh than what the Romans did to those victims that they crucified. So that's Acts 2:30 through 31. So now, demonstrating that my assessment continues to be accurate regarding the realization that this cast of contrarian characters was used by the Roman Catholic Church to concoct a malignant melody to take what was said of Dode on these occasions and apply it to the counterfeit Iousu Christon, now known as Jesus Christ. Shimon's incredulous monologue resumes, and I will share this with you, and then we'll pick up this text and our family hour tonight. This Iousun, but there was no Iousun. Can't be a this Iousun, and previously he was a Christon. This Iousun, whom Theos, there was no Theos. And if you don't know Yahweh's name, then you most certainly don't know who Dode is or what he did. Raised up, which all of us exist as witnesses. Therefore is the right hand of Theos lifted up and exalted. I'll stop there. No. First of all, the big problem was that Israel didn't witness what Yahweh and Dode proclaimed prophetically they were going to achieve. The whole reason Christianity exists is because Jews didn't witness what occurred, didn't recognize what occurred. Second, even in the myth, a very tiny percentage of Jews paid any attention to the Roman crucifixions. They were ghoulish. Why would you want to expose yourself to that? I mean, I understand there are some people that are really sickos that like to see torture. A lot of Muslims do today. But there were no Muslims back in that day, so no one in the area would have been gotten their jollies by witnessing torture. And if there were any, it would have been the Romans, and he wasn't speaking to Romans. So, no, nobody witnessed this. There is no record anywhere in the world of Twinkle Toes coming back to life. The only quasi-independent record of there even being a Jesus kind of fellow was allegedly written by Josephus. And of course, he doesn't speak of anyone witnessing this lifting up and exalting. He only speaks of, allegedly, of someone with a name that could be attributed to an Iousu in Greek. And he speaks that says very little about him. I think there's the text that associates with John the Baptist and then mistakes the whole story there and has it wrong. But there's a couple problems with that. First of all, there's nothing that you could base a religion on, nothing there to verify anything. And Josephus was a scumbag, a complete and utter traitor. In fact, his most famous story is what happened at Masada, and we now know it was a complete lie. So if he lied about the single most important story that he told, and we know he was an acknowledged traitor, if that's the best you got nothing. And also, there is no Latin version of Josephus' text that has ever been found. All we have is a Greek version, a translation of it, and it dates to the 5th century. And guess where it came from? Roman Catholicism's Eusebius's dirty hands. It's Eusebius that crafted that pathetic acknowledgement. There is no dating of a manuscript that even appears, as I say, prior to the 5th century. And it is even then a translation. So it is not a contemporaneous record. The furthest from it, 500 years dated, errant in its text, inconsistent with the Christian myth, 2 or 3 lines long. And it comes from Eusebius, who's the person who was the most aggressive at copy editing the Christian New Testament to make it work for the Roman Catholic Church. And the man was a traitor whose most famous story turned out to be a complete lie. And that's the best they got. So let me remind you, you got nothing, because the text of the Christian New Testament is verbal diarrhea. It is revolting, intellectual trash. And that's the best news I could bring to you, Christians, because I can free you from that counterfeit and fraud and point you in the right direction so that you might know the truth and enjoy the benefits of the covenant. Well, I thank you for listening. Wookie is now snoring, but he thanks you too. This is Craig Winn, and this has been the 32nd edition of Qatsyr Harvest on Shabuah. Thank you for listening.